Our first reading today comes from Genesis 22, 1 through 14. We continue the story of Abraham. After these events, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham." Abraham answered, "I'm here." God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him up as an entirely burned offering there on one of the mountains I will show you." So Abraham got up early in the morning, harnessed his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him. Together with his son Isaac, he split the wood for the entirely burned offering, set out, and went to the place that God had described to him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place at a distance. Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will walk up there and worship and then come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the entirely burned offering and laid it on his son Isaac. He took the fire and the knife in his hand, and the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father, "My father." Abraham said, "I'm here, my son." Isaac said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the entirely burned offering?" Abraham said, "The lamb for the entirely burned offering? God will see to it, my son." The 2 of them walked on together. They arrived at the place that God had described to them. Abraham built an altar there, arranged the wood on it. He tied up his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. But the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." Abraham said, "I'm here." The messenger said, "Don't stretch out your hand against the young man. Don't do anything to him. I know that you revere God and didn't hold back your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a single ram caught by its horns in the dense underbrush. Abraham went over, took the ram, and offered it as an entirely burned offering instead of his son. Abraham named the place "The Lord Sees," and that is the reason people today say, "On the mountain the Lord is seen." Thus ends the first reading. The second reading comes from Matthew 10, 40 to 42. "Those who receive you are also receiving me, and those who receive me are receiving the one who sent me. Those who receive a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Those who receive a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. I assure you that everybody who gives even a cup of cold water to these little ones because they are my disciples will certainly be rewarded." The word of God for the people of God. So, did you know that 56 people signed the Declaration of Independence? Their conviction resulted in suffering to themselves and their families. Of the 56 men, 5 were captured by the British and tortured to death. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the army. Another 2 had their sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died in the war. One man, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships sunk by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in poverty. At the Battle of Yorktown, General Cornwallis took over another's home for his headquarters. That man still ordered General Washington to open fire on his house. The home was destroyed, and that man died bankrupt. Another man left his dying wife and 13 children. When he came home, his plantation was destroyed, as were his family. He died from exhaustion shortly thereafter. These are the stories surrounding our country's birth that we don't normally hear. These men were committed to their cause, even in the face of overwhelming odds, even in the face of crushing adversity. And it's the same type of commitment that God seeks from us, seeks in each and every one of us. If we need to look for commitment, we don't need to really look much further than Abraham, partially because God keeps testing Abraham, doesn't he? Time and time again, but Abraham always passes the test. God is demanding total commitment from him. It's a difficult thing that God asks Abraham to do, yet once again, Abraham follows God's will and does something that many of us could not even begin to fathom. I mean, can any of us picture talking about tying our child to a pile of wood, holding a knife, and being ready to light it on fire? That's the sort of thing that gets you locked up on that floor of the hospital where there's only a key to get off the elevator instead of a button. You guys know what I'm talking about. Talking about doing this type of thing is awful, yet God is actually asking Abraham to do it. He's telling Abraham to do the unspeakable. If we recall last week's passage, Abraham already lost one son when Sarah told Abraham to cast out Ishmael and Hagar. And the scriptures completely ignore the story, don't they? They say, your only son, Isaac. Once again, Abraham is faced with the proposition of losing another son. I can only imagine the weight of every footstep as they approached their destination. I can only imagine the internal dialogue that was going on inside of Abraham's head. With every heavy step, he still carried on, though. With every doubt that must have been plaguing his mind, he carried on. The only thing moving him forward must have been the trust that he had in the God that had got him this far. The God that had made a covenant with him. When they arrived at their destination, I'm sure that Abraham was ready to make just about any bargain with God to get his son Isaac out of this situation. Yet he built an altar and laid his son out on the pyre as he raised his knife and was about to plunge it into his son's body. That's when God called out to Abraham. He instructed Abraham to spare the boy. God said he spared the boy because Abraham was faithful and was willing to give everything for God's will. That's when Abraham spotted the ram caught in the bush. God had provided the sacrifice, and Abraham named the mountain the Lord Sees. The Lord Sees. The names that are given these places are always strange, aren't they? But this one seems to fit. The Lord does see so much. We can hide our hearts and our intentions from each other, but God's another story. God looks into our hearts and finds ways of putting us in situations that can foster growth in areas that we need it most. Most of the time, not areas that we feel comfortable with growing, just areas that we need it. For Abraham, being a man chosen by God must have been something he needed to be reminded about. Time and time again, he needed to be reminded to stay committed to his one true God. The question I have is that what are the opportunities that God's giving us to grow? These often look like obstacles, don't they? They look like snares or just plain pitfalls in the grand scheme of life. Yet, in every one of these obstacles comes the opportunity to grow and to reshape ourselves into the image of the Holy One. I can look back in my life and see the wonderful growth that has emerged from some of the most trying times in my life. Now, that's not what I thought about at the time. That's what happened. Those times helped me to be a better pastor, a better husband, and a better father. I was just talking about this with Holly the other day, and it's true. It's not just the easy times that we find the opportunity to strengthen our relationship with God and each other. It's also those times that you're more than happy to see go. There are a couple things. If you can drive 1,000 miles in a car with a kid, you're stronger for it, aren't you? Never done it, but Holly and Bryant did it, and they seem to be stronger for it. If you can make it through the holiday weekend, any holiday weekend, pick one, at Disney with a family, and all go home alive and sane, you're stronger for it. If you can walk through a serious illness with a friend or a family member, I guarantee you're stronger for it. The important lesson that we take home from this week's lection is that God gives us strength in everything we do. And it's our commitment to God that fuels that strength. Being committed to God doesn't always mean that we understand what's happening or that everything will have this wonderful, happy outcome. Being committed to God means that through all of our trials and tribulations, we still give our lives over to the Lord. It means that when things get tough, we know that God is still with us. We all have parts of our lives that we could probably point to and say, this right here, this shows that we're committed to God and that God was always with us, helping us to grow. And if you can't think of any, I want you to take a moment later today or sometime this week and to just think about if you have one of those moments. I bet you'll find one. Then it's important for us to realize that God works through us. It's important for us to realize that in every adversity there's God with us, seeking to make the best out of this old sin-laden world. God has something he wants to do through us. Where we are, we say it every week, don't we? And it's true every day of the week, not just on Sunday at 10:55 or 11:05, but it's true every day of the week. God is always with us. God is always working with us. If we trust in God and commit ourselves to do God's work, there's no limit to what we can achieve. This is called faith, true faith. Amen.